When I was 22 years old, I was a fresh graduate of North Carolina State University. And I had majored in interpersonal communication, which basically means I talked my way through college. But that was a good thing, because the one thing I wanted to do is to become a speaker. I just didn't know how. And I had a good friend who was a professional speaker, and I asked him, I said, what do I have to do to become a speaker? And he said, Matt, live your life and take good notes. And I was like, what does that even mean? That seemed like the worst advice at the time, and I was fairly discouraged. So I took that dream, and I tossed it aside and decided to get into real estate sales. And go figure. But how often do we do that? We set aside our dreams for what makes more sense. Now at 22, I was in my parents' driveway, and I had a black Mercury Mountaineer. That was my college car, and you could tell because of the band stickers on the back, right? And everything I owned was inside that Mercury Mountaineer and the U-Haul behind it. And I was headed to Florida to get into real estate development sales. It was a bold move at 22 because I loved my family and I was leaving them. I loved my hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina. I was leaving that, and I was leaving my fiance at the time as well. She's now my wife. And there was this crossroads moment where I looked across the driveway and I saw my dad. My dad's a big guy like me, and I walked over and I gave him one of those big bear hugs. You're never too old to hug your dad. Dad's mouth was right next to my ear. And Dad whispered, don't let the world change you, son. You change the world. I'm thinking, Dad, couldn't you have taught me how to change a tire? Or they're like, gas is cheaper in Georgia, you know? I've got an 11-hour car ride, and I'm wrestling with how am I going to change the world? It's taken me many years to realize that what my father gave me that day was a blessing. My dad was saying, I believe in you. You matter, and you can change the world. Now understand that everybody comes here today with a different background, and maybe some of you have never been given a blessing. So if I can, you matter. I believe in you. And the genius that's inside of you can change the world if you're courageous enough to pursue it. You see, the problem I had at 22 is I thought in order to change the world, it meant big things, right? Like big income, big bank accounts, and big influence. And I went down to Florida, and I made a lot of money and a lot of really bad decisions. Free tip, those don't go well together. By the age of 25, I was $500,000 in debt, broke, and I moved back into my parents' room over the garage. That was cool when I was in high school, but not so much with the wife. And then I was given a gift. I had another profound experience. I grew up very close to my family, as I said, and I had an aunt, Aunt Trish. She was the kindest, sweetest, gentlest woman. She just radiated joy, like you expected Hakuna Matata to come out at any moment. So when Aunt Trish was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 48, we knew it was going to have a Disney ending. The year after she was diagnosed, she was hosting a Christmas party, and her Christmas swag sweater was just bouncing up and down along with her wig because she had lost all of her hair to the chemo treatment. I didn't know it at the time, but a month earlier, she had been given a terminal diagnosis. No matter what you're going through, you always have the opportunity to invest in others. A couple weeks later, my uncle called me. He said, if you want to see your aunt, you should probably come to the hospital. You see, her lungs were filling with fluid, and she was suffocating as a result of the complications from the cancer and the treatment. I made my way to the hospital, and there's 20 or 30 family and friends in the lobby, but you don't make eye contact because you know you're there because someone you love is dying. I just wanted to see my aunt. And I made my way to her hospital room, and I opened the door. And hospitals have that smell. And the lights kind of hum, and I looked, and my aunt was in the center of the room, and the lights kind of were projecting a halo around her bed. And as I walked over to her bedside, she caught me out of the corner of her eye, and she said, "Hey, Matt." That was her term of endearment for me. And I walked over, and I grabbed a knee, and I reached up, and I grabbed her hand, and I prayed with her. And I told her that I loved her. And we reminisced about that Thanksgiving when we danced to beach music in the kitchen when the turkey was in the oven. And then a nurse entered the room, kind of came around my aunt's bed. She propped my aunt up with a pillow, which allowed my aunt to grab a big breath of air. My aunt used that breath, looked at the nurse, and said, "You make my life easy." Without hesitation, the nurse looked back at my aunt and said, "You make my life rich." Those words were a seed that were planted in my heart. But we don't appreciate seeds, do we? In fact, today, if I offered you a seed or an orchard, you'd probably pick the orchard because you can see the trees, you can see the fruit. But the power of an orchard is in a seed. It's the small things that change the world. 7 years later, that seed began to take root in my heart. I was raising 3 sons at the time, my wife and I were, and things were great. I had kind of bootstrapped it, picked myself up from my financial difficulties, had gotten into insurance sales, was incredibly successful, so fortunate to be successful with our company, one of the top agents in our state. On the outside, everything looked fine, but that seed was taking root. And I remembered that 22-year-old kid and his dream. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. It's crazy. Like, what am I going to speak about, and who would care to listen? It doesn't make any sense. But I knew it's something that I had to do. And so I met with that same speaker friend again. And I said, "Hey, man, it hasn't gone away." And he said, "Well, you need to begin writing." I said, "Have you heard anything that I've told you? Like, I want to be a speaker, and you're telling me to write." One of the first stories that I wrote was the story of my Aunt Trish. That story inspired my first book, Redefine Rich, A New Perspective on the Good Life. And y'all, I thought I had it. I was writing a book, and I was writing a book, and I was starting to speak, and I was like, man, this is it, just taking steps. That summer when I was 32, I was diagnosed with spreading malignant melanoma. A small cancer that threatened to become something really big. Had to have surgery to have the cancer removed, and I'm fortunate today to be cancer-free. But that did something to me. All of those cliche things that we toss out, like your life is precious and today matters, they become real when you're faced with the reality of your own mortality. At that moment, I realized that I still had the Florida mindset. It was still about big things, big book contracts and big social media followings and big platforms. Truth of the matter is it was really just about me. Your genius is always for somebody else. In that moment, I had a vision about something bigger than myself, because listen, there's a lot of great speakers and there's a lot of great books. But I had this vision of an organization that would inspire, encourage, and teach people how to uncover their genius, discover their why, and live the life of impact they were created for. But I had absolutely no idea how to do it. What I've learned is that if you're courageous enough to even take the smallest steps toward uncovering your genius, you'll be met by the miraculous all the time. Through multiple connections, I was introduced to a gentleman named Kevin Adams. And Kevin and his family lived in Franklin, Tennessee, and I lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. And the first time we talked, I learned that he and his family had felt led to move to Wilmington. So when he moved to town, Kevin and I started getting coffee. Now, Kevin is my senior by a few years, certainly in experience and wisdom. And here was this man taking time to pour into my life everything that he had learned. He encouraged me. He challenged me. He pressed into truth. And I started to see some of these strongholds in my life being broken off and some of these obstacles being overcome as I continued to step into this dream, this desire to speak. And then Kevin and I said, we've got something here. And we formed our organization, UPrint. UPrint's a faith and personal development organization that helps people uncover their genius, discover their why, and live the life of impact they were created for. And we have a challenge question at UPrint, and that's this. What will have mattered about your life 1,000 years from now? It seems crazy, doesn't it? But when you look back at the heroes in history, the Dr. Martin Luther King, Jonas Salk, and Steve Jobs, they all had a small idea and the courage to pursue their genius, and it changed the world. And 1,000 years from now, their effects will continue to ripple through history. But here's the thing about 1,000-year vision. You get to live it out 1,000 seconds at a time. One of the things Kevin taught me is that the gravity of comfort is mediocrity. To get beyond one, you've got to let go of the other. I was in a comfortable place in my life. We were kind of building this company on the side. I still had this great insurance business. At this time, I had 4 small kids, and things were great. Wonderful income. It was just all wonderful. But it felt like my heart was divided into 2 places. I want to tell you today, your heart's too precious to be divided. You see, it was easy to talk about this stuff. It was a whole other thing to live it. About a year ago, I made the craziest decision of my life. And I walked away from a 10-year career in insurance to pursue this thing that I could not do. As you step into your genius, as you become who you were created to be, it requires that you let go of who you're not. And that requires that you move beyond comfort and therefore beyond mediocrity. The one thing that you have that cannot be taken from you is your genius. My life is living proof that life can take people you love. It can take your money. It can take your career. But it cannot take away your genius, who you were created to be. And that is worth pursuing with everything you've got. If a small town kid out of Wilmington, North Carolina can stand up here today living out his dream, doesn't matter what it is for you guys, but it's time to get busy doing it.